and the customer has to lawyer up, right?
Right.
So you're telling me if that's the case, okay, if that's an E&O exposure, are you telling me that sitting at a deposition table and the other party's attorney looking at you from across the table about the distance apart we are now and saying, so you mean to tell me, Mr. Howell, you knew this policy was going to lapse and you did nothing?
Bradley, we got a lot to talk about today. I got a lot I want to talk about today. I got a lot on my heart. But before we get started, you had something on your heart that every insurance agent in America at one time or another has gotten into an online debate with other agents about concerning calling late pays.
Yeah. So there's this great age-old debate. You know, if you go into IEOA or Insurance Soup or any of the umpteen thousand Facebook groups online and you say, hey, you guys should call your late pays, satellite dishes will start linking up in outer space and computer banks at NASA will kick on. It is such an age-old debate. And I do think, and this is a little harsh, I do think a lot of agents don't call late pays either out of, and by call, I mean contact. Right. Doesn't have to be a phone call.
And by the way, the age-old dilemma has always been the argument that has satellites linking up because the bandwidth has to expand on the internet over the debate is either you gotta get in touch with all of them or don't get in touch with any of them. Yeah.
So here's the thing. So, and that is true.
Yeah.
It's you do have to be consistent when you do it. My argument is that it is an E&O exposure and you still should do it. That's my argument. I'll tell y'all that from the beginning. I think that a lot of agents don't do it either out of lack of processes, a little bit of laziness, or just they might not care. Okay? We're not your babysitter, right? And the argument I always make to the agent that says that they are not going to do it is, okay, you've got a $250,000 account that you know the people want to renew with you. It's the day of renewal or the day before renewal or the day after renewal and you hadn't got a payment. Right. Are you telling me you're not going to call?
Right.
There is no one that wants to be successful that's not going to make that call. Okay? So you're telling me you're going to sit there and twiddle your thumbs, and you guys stick with me. I'm going somewhere with this. You're going to twiddle your thumbs when you're going to say, no, I'm not, out of principle, right? Okay, and the argument is, okay, it's an E&O exposure because if you call that person and then you don't call another time and then the same thing happens and it lapses, that could fall on you, okay? And several things have to go wrong for that to happen, right? You have to not call, it has to lapse, and there has to be a claim. Right? And the customer has to lawyer up, right?
Right.
So you're telling me if that's the case, okay, if that's an E&O exposure, are you telling me that sitting at a deposition table and the other party's attorney looking at you from across the table about the distance apart we are now and saying, so you mean to tell me, Mr. Howell, you knew this policy was going to lapse and you did nothing? You're telling me that's that has a less likely chance of happening?
Right.
To me, that's equally as bad.
Right.
You're not doing your due diligence, right? So there's that. But the other thing is, regardless of the account, and people always, when I make this point, they say, oh, well, we don't babysit people. And Bradley, you're all about automation and AI and all this technology stuff, but you're saying we need to devote man hours to babysitting your customers. That's not what I'm saying. I think you should have processes in place to where it does happen in an automated fashion. You take some of the risk out.
Sure.
You know, we contact our late pays, but a lot of it.
And by I don't mean to interrupt you,
good.
but by automating this process, I think it would, going back to your example of the deposition, where there might be the possibility of some lawyer saying something about discrimination. Well, if it is automated, and let's say something somehow, some way they don't get, it's going to be a lot harder for them to say, oh, you purposefully discriminated against that person. No, this is set up on automation.
Right.
Maybe the email went to the wrong email address, but it wasn't some kind of purposeful discrimination thing that we did.
Right. And I think you should set your agency up no cash, EFT or pay in full. You eliminate a lot of the late pays that way, right? And a lot of the carriers do the communications too for you, so you don't have to. But then you should have automations in place so that it should contact that customer if a payment was not made. But here's the thing. So I've got some statistics for you. So I ran a poll, okay, in the largest Facebook group on the internet of insurance agents. There's 50-something thousand agents in that group, okay? I ran a poll, and I asked, who here calls your late pays?
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
How many agents in this group?
Over 50,000. All right? And to give context, okay, there's 35,000 independent agencies in the country.
Correct.
Okay, 35,000 independent agencies. According to Google, there's 9,000 Allstate agents, 48,000 Farmers agents, which is absurd.
Yeah. How many Allstate did you say?
9,000.
Okay.
48,000 Farmers, 19,000 State Farm agents, 3,000 AmFam agents, for a total of 79,000 captive agents. Let's round that up to 100,000 because there's some I'm probably forgetting. And then 3,000 indies. So we got 130,000 insurance agencies in the country, give or take roughly, based on this math. Okay? So a group of 50,000 agents is pretty representative of the industry.
Right.
That's you're going to get a good sample size that generally reflects what the opinion is of the rest of the industry. So I said, doing a poll for a piece of content, does your agency call, text, automate, notify late pays? Care to guess what percentage said yes?
They do call.
That they do notify.
50.
69%. So 69% of the 50,000 agents, the people that voted, said yes. And then I can't do head math. 30% said no. Excuse me. Let me back up. Yes, 69% said yes. 30% said no. Okay, so large percentage that said yes, large percentage that said no. So then I followed that up with, Scott, with we're ending that debate. That's my point of doing this.
Yeah,
we're ending the debate of should you notify or not. All right. So then I asked, same group, who here has heard of a case where someone had an E&O claim for either notifying or not notifying?
Right.
And I'm not talking about,
because that's the whole basis of the other side of the argument is if you decide to call on all your late pays or you do it automated or however you do it, there is a chance that you could be sued if something were to happen and that policy expires and for some reason that person didn't get notified.
So I asked who knows of a case. And I'm not talking about sisters, aunts, cousins, nephew once told me there was a farmer's agent. I'm talking about of concrete, or it can be of one you know of, but you have to know for sure. It can't be a one-time thing, right? Okay? I know of an agent that had an E&O because he forgot to add roadside assistance to a policy. That was real. I know of that. That's dumb, but I know of that.
Yeah, I think he's sitting across the table from
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I was not referring to you.
But it was an agency support claim back when I was with Nationwide 10 or 12
Nationwide
years ago.
took care of it.
Yeah.
All right. So I asked, who here knows of a case? I'm going to read y'all some of the answers. In my 25th year, I've never heard of one. I actually acquired no, that's not important. Going on my 29th year, never heard of one. In 21 years in the industry, even living in the most litigious state in the country, obviously Florida, not even one. It's a myth. I would actually ask a few E&O carriers, blah, blah, blah.
So we did
never, and I would still warn my customers. This is a great question. Never. Yes, sir, that's why we have different levels of authority. You're applying, you're going to call me every month about late payment. You get in the court, blah, blah, blah. That person thought they were answering it. Never heard of it. So literally nobody in this group of 50,000 agents knew of a hardcore case. Okay, now I called
Take it a step further.
My E&O agent.
Yep, take it a step further. And she's only been doing this since she was about 12 years old.
The best E&O agent in the country. And I said, in your career, this is off the cuff just a second ago before it came on the air. In your career, do you know of a case where somebody's had an E&O claim because of this? And she immediately said, no, never.
Never.
Okay, so here's the thing. Just because something is an E&O exposure doesn't mean it's got a high likelihood of happening.
Right.
All right, here's the thing. All right, this is the point that I make. Okay, Scott, how big is your agency?
13 million.
So you're about, say, $1.5 million in revenue.
A little over that, 1.75, something
right,
in that range.
Let's do 1.7. Okay, what's your retention? Roughly
89. I'll call it 89%.
All right, 89. So let's pretend you guys don't notify your late pays. Okay. You take a hard stance, and you're like one of these crotchety people in the Facebook group. Not going to do it. Yeah. All right. Let's say by calling your late pays, you can improve that by 5%.
Ooh, that's a lot. That's a big bump.
That is a big bump. But if you're not calling anybody, and all of a sudden you're calling, that's $85,000 in revenue. Okay. What's your E&O deductible?
$2,500.
$2,500. All right. So if you have an E&O claim, how much are you paying for your E&O?
$6,000.
$6,000. So it's probably going to go up to 10 if you have a claim. So that's $4,000 plus $2,500 is $6,500. So if we take $85,000 divided by $6,500, you would have to have 13 of those claims in order for the math to point towards.
Right.
And hey, that's $85,000 a year.
Right.
You're getting that every year.
Right.
The LTV of your customers, your average customer stays 8 years. 85,000 times 8 is $680,000.
Right.
So my point is to everybody out there that says you shouldn't call late pays even though it's an E&O exposure, since it's an E&O exposure, is we're supposed to be in risk management.
Right.
Part of managing risk is not avoiding risk. It's going with the thing that's least likely to happen and is the most beneficial for your customer. I'll never forget, Zach Gould told me, he said, I don't care that it's E&O exposure. It's the right thing to do for the customer.
100%. So what you just said is you just exploded the argument that you shouldn't call your late pays because it's an E&O exposure.
It is an E&O exposure, but you should still do it.
Right.
So end all be all. If anybody out there is listening to this and they have an old crotchety agent or a young whippersnapper that thinks she knows everything or he knows everything, point them to the Insurance Guys podcast and play this for them. And let's just look at, and obviously I'm making a lot of assumptions in this, but I would rather have 85,000 in revenue and have, and by the way, I forgot to mention the claim that we're talking about that could happen. Nobody knows of one happening ever. Nobody knew of one, and the best E&O agent in the country had never heard of one.
So to go back to your first example you gave, Bradley, and I have never agreed with you more than I agree with this. You know what my problem is? Let me tell you what Scott Howells, Rand, I want you to listen to this. You know what my real problem is? I'm going to tell both of y'all what my real problem is. Everybody that's listening to this, I want you to hear this. My real problem is I genuinely believe this with all my heart, with everything, with every fiber of my being. If you're watching this right now or you're listening to this, my biggest problem is when one of my agents in my office, and it will happen today, there will be an agent in my office selling insurance policy to somebody. And at my core, in my heart, my belief is when one of my agents sells an insurance policy in my office, I, some way, how in my mind, in my spirit, and in my heart believe that the person they just sold that insurance policy to is genuinely now a part of my family.